get going. Another day, we've got a lot to do, as I always say. So today, communications revolution. Before I get on to that, next week we will be distributing the study guide for the exam. Probably by Tuesday, it'll go out. It'll be out by the middle of next week. Several of you have already submitted proposals for papers, which is great. We've got about a dozen. We've responded, Jeff and myself have responded to most of them, and others will get to today. And you still have a chance if you want to. We said today was the deadline. Just a couple of things about those very quickly. One is, as I just said to Adam, we've actually got what really look like 10 excellent proposals, either for a dissertation, a book, or a life's work. So you will find the first line of our reply is, try and narrow down and focus. I think at least 3 people gave me very nice summaries of about 700 words. Well, when you realize that the whole paper is only going to be 2,000 words, and you're just getting going. So I'm all encouragement, Jeff, and I both of you to do this. The papers are by far for us the most interesting thing to work with. But don't try to take on the whole world. Narrow it down. Say, well, let's not take on all technology, but one technology. Well, let's take one, but let's take one technology in one period in one society, and then we can talk about it. So keep that in mind. If you are doing one of those, try to make an appointment with me or Jeff and sit down and talk to it at least once. And we've already sent back to some of you saying, look, can you redo this in a narrower focus? That's giving you permission to go ahead, but just asking you to, get your thoughts in order now, rather than waiting until the papers are submitted and saying, gosh, I wish I had said, don't do this or do that. So those are the papers. The exam, let's say the study guide is coming out. Any questions on that for now? All right, so that's underway. Today we're going to do the communications revolution. One more thing. Sorry about my responses. Sorry about that. I wrote to several people between about 5 and 5:30 this morning, which is a terrible thing to do. And in doing that, I had forgotten that the Blanning question does include a line about Heilbronner. And I actually said, well, you don't really need to think about Heilbronner as well. Because the paper said, the question says you should include something about it, but don't try to wrestle with all Heilbronner's determinist questions. Just say a word or two about it. Yes? If we've given you the go-ahead, then go ahead. If we've asked you to resubmit, we've more or less given you the go-ahead, but said, let's look at the proposal again and talk that through, rather than just end up with the final essay or something like that. What's that? Yeah, the deadline is through, so you can get that in sort of over the next few days. Yeah, if you want to say something.
We need 5 references, scholarly references, either articles or books that aren't on the
So, and we can help you and suggest things to you for that, so we can work on that. Okay, one more, so there's apologies for that thing about the Heilbronner. My wife, when she occasionally comes to my talks, which she hates to do, will sit in the front row and count how many apologies I give before I get going. So my next apology, I just lost track of time in the last class, so we didn't get the whole way through IP. We will be doing some stuff on patents today, obviously, as you will know from reading the Beecham article. Also, I have gone back and edited the slides on the web to take out the stuff that we didn't get to, so you'll know if you're using those for revision purposes, that what's on the slides is what we talked about in class, and what isn't there, what we didn't get to won't be on the slides. The only other thing I did leave up were the people I'd chosen to talk about for the assignments, because I didn't even get to the assignments last time. So those people I called out, I thought had done a nice job or had made interesting replies. A shout out to Tim, who was wise enough to ask, who is this guy, Jesper Harding, who published the first publisher of the Philadelphia Inquirer? It's actually an interesting question, which we won't get to, but I just did shout out on that. So those slides have been edited, they're up. These slides are up too. Let me see if I can get to the end of these today. It'll be a good challenge. Okay, so we've now come back and we're going to start looking once more, having been in this long soup where we kept saying a lot is happening but there's no technology. Well, we've got a technology now. We've got 2 technologies. We've got the telephone, and this is the era that is often called the communications revolution. Now, we may seem a long way from all this stuff now, so distant, so far away. How many of you have iPhones? How many of you use AT&T service? Unfortunately, what was the founding moment of AT&T? Bell. It's the Bell Company. You're still there, working with the guy who founded the telephone way back when. So if you think these things are distant and don't concern you, and in fact, if I get to the end, I'll show you why what happened in the 19th century still has real entailments today. Okay, so we are there now. We're starting in the 19th century. We'll go back into the 18th just a little for some of the precursors. And here it is. It's a real machine. There's an early telegraph ticker. And that's what we're going to... Anybody here ever probably not received a telegram? Yeah. No. Anybody seen a telegram? But you kind of know what they look like, those strange... they used to come in across the wires as strips of paper, be cut out with scissors and then pasted to a sheet of backing paper, and then some poor soul would get on a bicycle and ride across town and deliver it to a door. So that's the beginning of the communications revolution. So where are we going to go? Well, one thing we want to talk about is that this world of the 19th century has changed a lot. And that's both being driven by the technologies, but also being putting pressure on technologies. So which way the pressure goes is interesting. So there's a great claim, it's a communications revolution. Now you know that I've been skeptical about such claims. I'm going to go through the standard story of how it's told, see what it looked like, but then later I may ask a few questions about it. One thing I want to look at, again as we've done in the past, recurring, as we look forward to the exam, I'm going to go back over topics we've thought about the eyewitness reports. I got sort of excited that Plato and Socrates are eyewitness reports, that Tritemius is an eyewitness report. Well, we're going to be looking at a lot of much more contemporary eyewitness reports to this technology. It comes along, what did they say? Both about the technology and the inventor. And one of the questions that will come up more and more is, in fact, how much are these great inventors inventions themselves? We talked a little bit about Gutenberg. We looked at the story of Thebes and Famous and all that. Well, do these modern people look very different? How much can we say about these inventors really being these single geniuses that we want to know about? And then finally, something else we talked about from the beginning of the class, the temptation when a new technology comes along to do what I call wishing on technology, to look at a new technology and say, this is the kind of technology that's going to give me the society that I've really always longed for. And that's a tremendous temptation, which we can certainly recognize today, and it goes back a long way. So the changing world, we looked at this great painting before Gust's painting very early on as an image in some way of technological progress. It's the United States, it's going west. Here are the old animals, the old indigenous populations, and they're being driven out. They're being driven out by the wagon train, the lone riders, the gold miners, but then there's the stagecoach, which is now a much more institutional way. And there's the train, and bang in the middle, there's the telegraph coming along as this sign, and this is progress. These people are out of it. This is the new world. The plains that were once occupied by the buffalo are now being taken over by agriculture, form that progress again. And just in the distance, so it's hard to see, there's the city and urban life also moving over the horizon and saying that's the new world. And with it come new populations, come new markets for goods, new firms and business to address them. So the whole world in this vision of Gauss, it comes in the 1870s, I think, but is this idea of a transformation. Now it's clearly mythic. But on the other hand, there are real realities to it, and we want to talk about them. And in that changing world, as I say, both driving change but also being driven by change as populations spread out, are these increasing communication needs. That people want it to reach further afield, to be able to communicate across larger distances, because now, whether for business or social purposes, communities have spread out. They want greater speed. They want a real faster turnaround. Now here I want to just voice a caution before we think. I mean, one of the first ways of addressing this was the post office. And somebody said in their homework, sort of quite rightly the other day, about the new technologies, well, how could it work with the post office, when you get one letter a day, whereas nowadays we can send emails back and forth. We have to be cautious about condescending to the past. In Dickens' London, for instance, you could get between 5 and 6 mail deliveries a day. I could write to you and say, want to come to dinner. You could write back and say, okay, what time? I could write back and say, 6 o'clock, bring a bottle of wine. You could write back and say, can I bring my girlfriend or boyfriend? And I could write back and say, okay, you're on. Now, there are not many people probably with whom you exchange 6 direct messages or more than that a day. So this wasn't that primitive a world, but clearly things were changing. In fact, the fact that there were so many and such rapid turnaround of mail in big cities was itself a sign that people were asking for more and more of this. But along with speed, two things we had to bear in mind that were particularly important and hard to develop were regularity. I mean, one thing is great if I can get, in the moment of crisis, a horse to ride from New York to New Jersey. But if, as in the case of Sparta, by the time he gets there, he drops dead, he's so exhausted, and I don't have another horse to send, it's not that useful. What you need and what starts to be built, things where you can say, I know there's going to be a messenger, a package, whatever, going out every day or every hour. And so regularity and then frequency and predictability are almost as important as speed in these things. And that kind of thing starts to need a lot of institutional structure to go along with it. Looking back, just long distances, we find, in Roman times, the Romans build these huge communication networks across their empire, across Europe, in part to move armies across, but also to move messages across so they don't have to move armies. I mean, one of the things is to know what's going on and be slow about it. But it took, from the heart of empire out to the further reaches of empire, it took 26 days to get a message out there. Now, one of the entailments of that, of course, is that if you want centralized control, it's fairly difficult to do with a 52-day turnaround, just get a letter out and back. And so a lot of people in these outer reaches were fairly autonomous, because they said, well, Rome won't hear about this for another 2 months, and even if they don't like it, they won't be able to reply for another 2 months, etc., etc. So what you realize is that as you start to concentrate these networks, you start to extend greater and greater control, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In sort of early Europe, people started to develop messenger systems and to develop routes and to say, we will carry messages at regular intervals along these routes. Franz von Tassis, in the 15th century, late 15th century, created one of the first kind of postal routes of this sort. He is remembered today in almost every society you go to. For what? Everybody will know this name. Slight variation on the name. Well done, Tim. Taxi. We get the name taxi, in fact, from von Tassis. So when you go to anywhere and see that car, whatever country you go to almost, you'll see a sign outside where you land saying taxi. It's a tribute to him. He began this great communications empire, created a great deal of money, became Count von Tassis, and again, as with the AT&T, if you think these things get wiped out by new communications networks, there in fact is the current Count von Tassis, still living handily on the income generated by his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. So these things have continuity. Okay, so by land, we start to develop these new systems that move with great regularity and increasing speed. The mail coach. Usually we actually do a class on the post office, and sadly this semester we're not doing it. It's a great thing to try to understand, and I'm not going to try and do it in 2.5 weeks. But we start, 2.5 minutes rather. We start to get the mail coach again, a system that both carries people and carries messages across towns and then across countries. The English mail service has developed to do both. One thing to note there, and then to note the pressure, is people start to say, well, can we move messages faster than people? Because at the moment, the messages are being carried far and wide, they're being carried by people and at the same rate of people. And the temptation is to say, can we break away from that problem? Then a train comes along, and although 30 miles an hour doesn't seem all that significant to us, it's revolutionary at the time. It makes an enormous difference to be able to move across distances, and this happens first in England, then in continental Europe, then in the States. In the 1820s and 30s, we start to get more and more travel by train. Also, we're going global in one way or another, whether by empire, whether by commercial network, and we start to get shipping routes. Now, at first, the mail is carried overseas mostly by private merchant ships, which tended to leave on their own time when they had a full cargo, when it was convenient for them, and they tended to sometimes change route when somebody sent them a message halfway over to say, your cargo of cod will sell much better in Greece than it will in Italy. They would redirect the ship, and all your mail, which you would happily send towards Italy, is now carried off to Greece. They suffered, too, from being the standard prey of war. So if you read letters from this 18th century period, you often see, well, I sent a message to you, but I heard that the ship was taken over by the French. And the first thing they almost always do as a sign of conquest is just chuck all the mail overboard. So in fact, what you start to see is that people don't simply send one message, but they will write the same message 10 times and send it on 5 ships. And so again, I don't know what it's like at the time, but now as a historian trying to reconstruct this, you suddenly find this whole slew of messages. And at the top of the messages says, my last message to you is transcribed above. And that one says, my last message to you is, and you get these pieces of paper stuck together with transcription so they can be sure that the whole correspondence got through. So we turned from that to starting to get these ships that ran a regular service. Some run by government, more by private service. Most of them were armed in order to keep away the various predators who were trying, whether pirates or enemy people. And so you see here a list of the packet boats going back and forth to the States from England. This is Dickens. We talked briefly last week about him coming to the States, and this is when he arrived in Boston. He sends this message, significant to us in 2 ways. Soon afterwards, the Britannia steam packet, which actually, that one was built in 48, I think it's Brunel, 46, so Dickens was smaller and older. Soon after, the Britannia steam packet from Liverpool, 18 days out, so it took 18 days to cross the Atlantic. It was a packet ship carrying messages, was telegraphed at Boston, and there's a key word for us today, telegraphed. So the packet ship becomes an important and regular system of delivering mail over long distances across the sea. It is also a very resonant term for us. From the packet ship, what do we get? Packets on the internet. Norman Davis, who came up with the concept of packet switching, was using this very idea, and that's why he in fact called it packets. And in fact also, those of you who are interested in computer science, if you look at Alan Turing, he oddly enough uses the phrase packet to refer to these little things of information, and part of it comes down. But Davis was very consciously thinking of the packet service, and indeed what I described about letter sending, of these reiterations until a message goes through and is confirmed as going through. Okay, so here we are going in this direction. What is needed as we start to develop this from the individual leaping on a pony, going outside and taking a dollar bill from someone and saying, I'll carry your message, or I'm going to Cincinnati, let me carry your note. We get these different services offered, and what that demands is an increasing and growing infrastructure. If you're going to have railways and railway routes, you suddenly have to start laying down railway lines. If you're going to have canals, you suddenly have to dig up the ground from here to there. If you're going to have telegraph, you're going to have a site which is still common today, but at the first time was enormously shocking. These poles run across town carrying wires and cables all around. And so it's no longer simply a kind of personal or private matter. It's moving more and more out into the space of the world to take things over. So what's one of the implications of that? So we're no longer just, I say, Michael, carry a message for me, and because I'm the guy in charge, he has to do it. So it picks it up. Now we're building a whole infrastructure to do that. Very efficient, very effective, but has significant implications. Yeah. So one is a lot of people. These are becoming, with a lot of people, another implication of that, absolutely right. New jobs and the other side of jobs. New businesses, new organizations, in order to employ them, to organize them, and so absolutely. So the two go together. So that's one. So we start to see the rise, and you'll see around Morse and around Bell, these new businesses springing up to take advantage, to employ people on these new ideas. So that's one. Okay, so that's one. Another one. So a lot of questions of trust and obligation, absolutely, which become terribly important here. And can you trust these people? Are they in it for their own interest? Are they going to, questions we know today, are they going to read your mail for one reason or another because it's in their interest? And are you prepared to let them do that in order that they can provide a cheap service? So there's another. Anything else? Yeah. Funding. Okay, so we start to get stock companies, big stock options, bond issues, money raised in huge amounts for the time. Extraordinary amounts of the American infrastructure was raised on the stock market in London. Huge amounts of money came over here. And it turned out also to be a very good way to commit fraud, because people in London didn't quite know where Cincinnati was. And if you told them, that Cincinnati is just close to New York, they would, some fools would be enough to believe. So you see a lot of stock fraud. There's a big railway crash not long after the railway boom. Not unlike crashes and booms we've seen recently. People put huge amounts of money into railways. And the railways weren't built, and there were problems, and the markets crashed in the 30s, and they did it again in the 50s, or late 40s or 50s, I think it was. Okay, what else? Yeah. Terribly important point. If you're going to say, look, I want to put a telegraph line across the city or across the state, you're going to have to get right of way to do it. You're going to have to get much more of a right of way if you want to put a railway line, and even more of a right of way if you want to dig a canal. Because you have to go to the farmer and say, I want the next 3 miles which runs across the ground. I'm going to dig a big hole in it, I'm going to send boats through it, and I'm going to charge money for it. So another of the things then that becomes enormously significant is indeed growing kinds of state intervention. And they work two ways. In one way, people start to petition the state to say, can you guarantee that I can take over the land, both state land and private land, between these 2 points? So that becomes the money. On the other hand, you get a push by the state saying, look, we need to connect into this network. So here's the first California law laying down how they'll get the cable, the wire, not transcontinental, it's too early for that, it's only in the 50s, but within the state, linking San Francisco, Sacramento, and Marysville in the hope that it'll catch something coming across the mountains. But now more and more, the role of the state, and therefore the influence between corporations and the state and vice versa, is becoming enormously important to getting it going. And so we also see, as we saw last time, much greater control over the intellectual property, because if you want to say, I'm going to create a telegraph to run from Sacramento to Marysville, nobody's going to invest if someone's going to come along and say, but you don't own the right to use that technology. So all the stuff we talked about last time, the question of when you have patent law, what counts as a monopoly. We talked about the first Copyright Act briefly. This is the first, 1790 is also the first Patent Act. I never remember which I meant to say here. Patent confusion is right. You see the main countries developing more and more sophisticated type regimes, and you see problems coming up. If you look at French patents, you will often see written on them, SDG, sans garantie du gouvernement. And because people say, and this will come back to us when we look at Morse, look, if the government has said that I have a license to do this, they are in some way endorsing this. And the French had to say, well, no, we're not. We're saying that you have a right to do it, but we're not saying whether it's good, whether it works. That's nothing to do with us. And that becomes an enormous confusion in this realm of intellectual property. Another thing which we won't get much to talk about here is that there was enormous resistance across the century to patents. In America in particular, we saw it with copyright, like international copyright. But people began to look at these hugely fat cats. The question of the 1% comes up again, and saying they're getting enormously rich because they own controlling patents. And what can we do? Should this system be allowed to exist? And for those of you, I hope at least some of you did, who read Henry George's piece from San Francisco in the assignment, he's part of what he's getting at, is how controlling patents can be. The San Francisco newspapers were completely ad hoc to the news service, the Western Union news service coming over the wire. Let's leave patent agents out of it, we don't have time. So another thing that happens true is not only government laying down intellectual property law, but more and more cross-government intervention. Because now if you want wires to run between states, you have to have treaties to negotiate it, you have to determine who can send a wire over it, where it will go, what its route is. So Prussia and Austria were very early to have an agreement. England and France, the old enemies, but they in fact very quickly got a trans-channel agreement, one of the first underwater agreements, I think. Then the big one, New York, Newfoundland, going up to Canada. And that's a little like the Canadian, like the California one going up to Marysville. They wanted to send a line from New York to Newfoundland. Why? Yeah, because they said, well, that's the shortest gap. So the cable, not only will the British send their cable to Canada because it's their province, they own it colonial-wise, but it's also the quickest route to get a cable then from Europe to New York. You can go down. So let's, like that California cable going from Sacramento to Marysville, let's send a cable up to Newfoundland, and then soon after that, in '58, you get the laying, along with this polka music that goes with it, the laying of the cable across the Atlantic. They make it, they send some messages across, which we'll talk about, and then it breaks. And it takes about 8 years to get a decent cable down. But slowly, the world is being interconnected. And so you start to see these lines running around the world, connecting, and the more dense the communications, the more dense the markets, the more dense the communication lines. So here you have this sort of primeval early communications network, which we look at and say, oh, weren't they quaint, those Victorians?